When Alpha James finds a dying pregnant leopard in a storm, his council calls it weakness to save her. When he kneels to tend her wounds, they call it madness. But when she gives birth in his fortress and vanishes 3 days later, leaving behind only a black feather and silver-blue flames burning in every torch, James realizes she was never just a leopard at all. Betrayed and thrown into Shadow Ravine by those who believed mercy made him unfit to lead, James learns too late that the leopard was the moon goddess's messenger. And the test wasn't whether he was strong enough to kill. It was whether he was strong enough to kneel. A wounded, pregnant leopard collapsed at the Alpha King's door in the middle of a storm, begging for sanctuary. Thunder split the sky above the northern mountains, rolling like a challenge across stone and ice. Rain lashed the fortress walls in silver sheets, driven by a wind that howled like a restless spirit denied entry to the world of the living. Torches guttered along the battlements, their flames bowing low as if in reverence or warning. James Brown, Alpha King of the Northern clans, stood alone upon the high wall, his broad shoulders wrapped in a dark cloak that snapped sharply in the wind. From here, he could see the world he ruled. Jagged peaks crowned with snow, forests black and endless, and valleys that had learned his name through blood and victory. They whispered his name in fear and awe. James Brown, the Alpha who had never lost a war. The wolf who broke rival packs and bent them to his will. The king whose roar alone could still a hall full of warriors. Yet power had not spared him loss. The moon goddess had taken much from him. His Luna was gone. Claimed by sickness years before, her laughter lingering only in the cold chambers of memory. No heir had ever answered his bloodline. And despite every conquest, every offering made beneath the full moon, the sacred bond between Alpha and Goddess remained fractured, distant, silent. James lifted his face to the storm, rain streaking through his dark hair and down the hard planes of his face. He felt the ache in his chest he had long learned to ignore. Victory had taught him discipline. Grief had taught him endurance. Silence from the moon had taught him nothing at all. Then shouts. Urgent. Sharp. Out of place. James turned as guards ran along the wall, their armor clattering, torches swinging wildly. Alpha King, one called. At the gates. James was already moving. The massive iron-bound doors of the fortress loomed below, slick with rain, guarded by spears and wary men. The storm swallowed sound, but even through the thunder James sensed it. Something wrong, something that did not belong. What is it? He demanded as he reached the stairs' end. The guards hesitated. Not a raiding party, one said slowly. Not a challenger. They parted. Something lay slumped against the outer gate, its golden-spotted hide darkened with blood and rain. At first glance, instinct screamed danger, predator, apex, death given form. A leopard. Massive, powerful even in stillness. Her flanks shuddered with labored breath. Then James saw her belly. Heavy. Distended. Low. She was pregnant. One hind leg dragged uselessly beneath her, scraped raw and swollen, the flesh angry and torn as if she had fled through thorns or claws or both. Blood matted her fur, washed thin by rain, but fresh enough that the scent struck James hard, iron and life and pain. The leopard lifted her head. Golden eyes met his. There was no snarl, no baring of teeth, no challenge, only desperation. A murmur rippled through the guards. Kill it, a warrior growled, tightening his grip on his spear. Before it attacks. Another nodded. A wounded predator is the most dangerous. James did not answer at once. His gaze remained locked with hers. The storm roared around them, yet in that moment, the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. Against tradition. Against dominance. Against reason. Something twisted deep in his chest. The leopard did not lunge. She did not retreat. She took one faltering step forward and collapsed. A sharp intake of breath went through the men. James raised a hand. Silence fell. Bring her inside, he said. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then voices erupted. Alpha, are you mad? This violates the law. She could kill us all. James turned, and the sound died in their throats. "I said," he repeated, voice low and iron-hard, "bring her inside." Reluctantly, carefully, the guards approached. The leopard tensed weakly, but did not strike as they lifted her onto a reinforced stretcher. Her gaze never left James. As the gates closed behind them, thunder boomed again, as if the mountain itself disapproved. The outer chamber near the great hearth was cleared within moments. Servants fled. Warriors lingered only long enough to be dismissed with a look. James ordered the healer summoned, then waved him away. "I will tend to her," James said. The healer stared. "My king." "Go." When the door shut, silence rushed in, thick and heavy. Firelight danced across stone walls and golden fur. The leopard lay on her side, sides heaving, pain radiating from her in waves James could almost feel. Slowly, deliberately, James removed his cloak and weapons. He set them aside as if entering sacred ground. Then, astonishing even himself, he knelt. An alpha king did not kneel. But James did. He moved with care, showing empty hands, letting her see every motion. The leopard watched him closely, muscles trembling beneath her skin. He cleaned the wound with warm water, the scent of blood sharp in the air. She flinched but did not strike. He worked slowly, patiently. The storm raged outside, but inside, time stretched thin. Then she did something no one would ever believe if he spoke of it. The leopard lowered her head to the stone floor and closed her eyes. "Trust." The word struck James like a blow. He finished bandaging her leg, his hands steady though his heart was not. He dragged a thick fur from near the hearth and laid it beside her. With a soft sound, almost a groan, she shifted onto it, curling protectively around her swollen belly. The fire crackled. Minutes passed. Or hours. Then her body tensed. A low sound escaped her throat, not a growl, but pain. James froze. Understanding dawned. Outside, thunder roared louder, rain hammering the fortress, as if the sky itself bore witness. The leopard's breathing changed, rhythmic, strained. Life pressed insistently forward. James remained where he was, silent and still. He had faced armies without fear. Yet nothing had prepared him for this. A shudder ran through her, and then a tiny shape slid into the world, slick and fragile, its faint cry cutting through the storm. James's breath caught. A cub. Moments later, another followed, smaller, weaker, but alive. The Alpha King, conqueror of clans, breaker of enemies, felt his throat tighten. By the time dawn crept pale and hesitant through the narrow windows, the storm had passed. The leopard lay still upon the fur, her cubs pressed close, suckling softly. Peace filled the chamber like a held breath finally released. The fortress felt different, quieter, humbled, sacred. James rose slowly to his feet, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. He looked upon the small family and felt something ancient stir within him, something he had believed lost forever. The leopard would recover. He knew it as surely as he knew the rising of the moon. And soon, she would leave. But as James turned toward the light of morning, unaware of eyes watching beyond stone and sky, one truth lingered unspoken in the air. He did not know it yet, but the blessing had begun. A king kneels before a beast. The leopard's weight dragged against James's shoulders as he climbed the final steps into Greymoor's heart. Rain hammered the stone behind them, turning the fortress entrance into a waterfall of silver and shadow. His boots left muddy prints across floors that hadn't seen dirt in decades. The council chamber erupted before he'd crossed the threshold. "My lord, you cannot. That creature doesn't belong. The sacred halls have never." James didn't slow. He carried the leopard through the archway where his ancestors had signed treaties and sentenced traitors, where the very stones seemed to hold their breath at this desecration. The beast's blood dripped onto marble that had known only human footfalls for 300 years. Elder Margrave stepped into his path, white beard trembling. "Alpha James, I must insist you reconsider. This animal is under my protection." James's voice cut through the rising protests. "Which makes it pack." The silence that followed held a sharp edge. You would claim a wild beast as one of us? Margrave's face had gone pale. You would break every tradition our fathers built? I would honor the bond our fathers understood. James met each council member's gaze in turn. Before we forgot what it meant to be wolves. He moved toward the healer's chamber, his arms burning from the leopard's weight, but Margrave wasn't finished. Then let the healers tend to it. You are the alpha. You don't lower yourself. I dismiss this council. The words rang against stone walls. Leave us. The shock in their faces might have been satisfying if his shoulders weren't screaming. One by one, they filed out, Margrave's glare promising this wasn't over. Only healer Sienna remained, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, medicine bag already in hand. But when James laid the leopard on the wide oak table at the chamber's center, she hesitated. My lord, I've never treated a leopard. The anatomy, the dosages, I could do more harm then. Then guide me. James was already rolling up his sleeves. Tell me what you do for a wolf, and I'll adapt. James. Please, Sienna. Something in his tone made her close her mouth and nod. The leopard lay motionless as they worked, golden eyes tracking every movement. James started with the shoulder wound, the worst of the three. Under Sienna's instruction, he cleaned away mud and debris with warm water and cloth, each stroke deliberate and gentle. The scent hit him as he worked, blood and rain and something wild, something that made his wolf pace restlessly beneath his skin. Not prey, not threat. Something his instincts couldn't name but recognized nonetheless. Firelight painted shadows across rosette-marked fur. This close, James could see the silver threading through black spots, the old scars crisscrossing lean muscle. A survivor. A fighter. The wound is deep, Sienna murmured, leaning closer. Through muscle. It'll need stitching. James's hands didn't shake as he threaded the curved needle, though he'd never done this before. The leopard's breathing hitched when metal pierced flesh, but those golden eyes never left his face. I'm sorry, James said softly. I know it hurts. Another stitch. Another. The puncture on the flank was cleaner, easier. The gash across the ribs required careful attention, close to vital organs, Sienna warned. Rain drummed against the windows. The fire crackled. James's world narrowed to fur and blood and the steady rhythm of his own breathing matching the leopard's. There's trust here, Sienna said finally, wonder creeping into her clinical tone. It knows you're helping. James met the leopard's gaze and saw something shift behind the gold. Slowly, deliberately, the great cat lowered its head until its chin touched the table. Eyes closed. The ultimate vulnerability. Surrender. Something cracked open in James's chest. All his life, he'd been taught that strength meant standing tallest, commanding loudest, dominating absolutely. But this creature, bleeding and cornered and fierce enough to kill bears, had just shown him a different kind of strength. The strength to trust. James finished the final bandage and found himself kneeling beside the table, bringing his eyes level with the leopard's. In the council chamber, they'd called this lowering himself. They were right, and they understood nothing. A king didn't diminish by kneeling before something greater than pride. You're safe now, he whispered. Whatever you're running from, whatever hunts you, you have my word. The leopard's eyes opened. In their depths, James saw ancient knowing, saw recognition that transcended species and speech. One predator to another. One soul to another. Then the leopard's body went rigid. James's hand froze on spotted fur. Sienna. The healer had gone still, her attention fixed on the leopard's swollen belly. Oh gods. The leopard's sides contracted. A low sound emerged from its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a cry. Its claws scraped against wood as another spasm rolled through muscle and fur. She's in labor, Sienna breathed. Thunder shook the fortress walls. The storm outside had found new fury, wind screaming through arrow slits, rain turning the world beyond to chaos. The leopard's golden eyes found James's again, and in them he read desperation, determination, and bone-deep exhaustion. She hadn't been running from something. She'd been running to somewhere safe enough to give birth. And she'd chosen here. Chosen him. James's hand found hers, massive paw meeting human palm. as another contraction seized her body. Lightning split the sky outside, throwing stark shadows across the healer's chamber. "Tell me what to do," James said. Sienna's face had gone white. "I've never delivered a leopard cub. This could go wrong 100 ways. And if there are complications." The leopard's body convulsed again, harder this time. Her breathing came in desperate pants. "Then we'll face them." James didn't look away from those pleading golden eyes. Together. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a wild creature prepared to bring new life into a fortress built to keep wildness out. And between them, a king knelt in the firelight, hand clasped around a paw, redefining what it meant to be alpha. Birth beneath the moonless sky. The storm's fury matched the leopard's pain. Each contraction brought thunder that rattled the ancient stones. Wind tore through the fortress like something alive and angry, howling through corridors that had weathered 1,000 storms, but never one like this. "Blankets," James commanded without looking up. "Clean water. And close every door between here and the outer walls." Sienna moved quickly, gathering supplies. But outside the chamber, James heard voices rising, warriors drawn by the commotion, council members who'd lingered despite dismissal. What madness is this? An animal birthing in the Alpha's hall? The moon will turn her face. James stood in one fluid motion and crossed to the door. He didn't open it. Simply placed his palm against the wood and let his voice carry through. "Anyone who enters this chamber without my permission will be removed from the pack." The words emerged soft as silk and sharp as broken glass. "Anyone who disturbs what happens here tonight answers to me at dawn." Silence fell beyond the door. Then footsteps retreating. When James returned to the table, the leopard's breathing had grown ragged. Her massive sides heaved with effort, golden eyes glazed with pain, and something deeper, primal fear that transcended species. "It's all right," James murmured, resuming his position at her head. His hand found the spot behind her ear, stroking gently. "You're not alone." Sienna positioned herself near the leopard's hindquarters, hands steady despite her pale face. "The first cub is coming. I can see." "Gods, James, I don't know if I'm doing this right." "You're doing fine." James kept his voice calm even as his heart hammered. "Talk to me. What do you see?" "The sack. It's intact." "That's good, I think." "But she's struggling. The cub is large or positioned wrong or—" The leopard's cry split the air, raw and terrible and achingly vulnerable. Her claws gouged deep scratches into the oak table. Every muscle in her body strained. James pressed his forehead to hers, feeling the heat radiating from her fur. "Push," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand the words. But maybe she'd understand the tone, the encouragement. "You can do this. You're the fiercest thing I've ever seen. Push." Lightning turned the world white. In that frozen moment, James saw Sienna's hands working, saw the leopard's body convulsing, saw the precise instant when nature's terrible miracle happened. A small, wet form slid free. "It's out," Sienna gasped. "The cub is, oh thank the gods, it's breathing." The tiny creature mewled, a sound so fragile it barely registered above the storm. Sienna worked quickly, clearing the birth sac, wiping away fluids. The leopard twisted her head, maternal instinct overriding exhaustion, low rumbles emanating from her chest. "Let her see," James said. Sienna brought the cub close. No bigger than James's hand, covered in wet fur already showing the promise of rosettes. The leopard's rough tongue emerged, grooming her baby with strokes that were surprisingly gentle for something with so many teeth. For one perfect moment, peace settled over the chamber. Then the leopard's body seized again. "There's another," Sienna said, urgency sharpening her tone. "But something's wrong. She's too tired. If she can't push." The second cub was dying before it was born. James knew it with terrible certainty. He'd seen enough difficult births among the pack, had witnessed the heartbreak of cubs that never took their first breath. "No." The word emerged harder than he'd intended. He moved to the leopard's side, meeting those exhausted golden eyes. "You don't give up. Not now. Not after everything." But the leopard was fading. Each breath came slower. The fight was leaving her eyes. Something fractured inside James's chest. Not a clean break, but a jagged tear that reached all the way down to the place where he kept his carefully controlled grief. He saw suddenly not a leopard, but every loss he'd carried with silent strength. The mate he'd never find. The cubs he'd never father. The future that had closed like a door he couldn't reopen. Please. His voice cracked on the word. Please don't let this one die too. He didn't realize he was crying until Sienna's sharp inhale made him aware of the wetness on his face. The great alpha of Greymoor, tears cutting tracks through the blood and dirt on his cheeks, begging a wounded animal to keep fighting. The leopard's eyes found his. Something passed between them, understanding, shared pain, the bone-deep knowledge of what it meant to face impossible odds. She pushed. The effort nearly broke her. James felt it in the way her body trembled, saw it in how her eyes started to roll back. But she pushed, and Sienna's hands guided, and James held onto that spotted head like it was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid with rain and tears and blood. It's coming, Sienna breathed. Come on, little one. Come on. The second cub emerged smaller than the first, terrifyingly still. Sienna worked with desperate efficiency, clearing airways, rubbing circulation into tiny limbs. Seconds stretched into eternities. Then a mule. Weak but present. Alive, Sienna whispered. Both cubs alive. James couldn't speak. Couldn't move. He watched the leopard gather her babies close, watched her exhausted body curl protectively around new life. The storm still raged but seemed distant now, belonging to a different world than this warm circle of firelight and beating hearts. You did it, he finally managed, voice raw. You beautiful, impossible creature. You did it. The leopard's purr was barely audible, but James felt it vibrate through his hands still resting on her shoulder. She licked her cubs with methodical devotion while James and Sienna cleaned and bandaged and made sure mother and babies were stable. Outside, the storm began to ease. Rain softened from hammering assault to gentle percussion. Wind died to whispers. The moon remained hidden behind clouds, offering no blessing, no sign. The sacred silence James's pack had always interpreted as judgment. But in this moment, James didn't care. Let the moon stay silent. Let tradition rail against what he'd done. He'd witnessed something more holy than any ceremony, the raw, messy miracle of life persisting against all odds. They need rest, Sienna said, packing away supplies. And so do you, my lord. James shook his head. I'll stay, in case they need anything. She studied him with knowing eyes, but only nodded. I'll be in the next chamber. Call if there's trouble. Alone with the leopard and her cubs, James settled into a chair by the fire. His body ached. His soul felt scraped raw. But beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Not quite hope. Not quite healing. But perhaps the first seed of both. The leopard's golden eyes tracked him as he added wood to the fire. One cub nursed while the other slept tucked against spotted fur. A family. Whole and protected and safe. James closed his eyes, meaning to rest them for just a moment. He woke to changed light. Dawn crept through the windows, soft and gray. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. James sat up, joints protesting, and found the leopard watching him with an expression that seemed almost knowing. Then he heard it. Voices in the corridor outside. Not angry or fearful. Awed. My lord. A young warrior's voice, barely more than a whisper. You need to see this. James rose stiffly and opened the door. The warrior stood with his face upturned, staring at something James couldn't see from this angle. What is it? The warrior's eyes shone when they met his. The fortress, Alpha. Look at the fortress. James stepped into the corridor and followed the warrior's gaze upward. Every torch in Greymoor burned silver blue. Not the warm gold of normal flame. Not the orange red of fire. Pure silver blue, the exact color of moonlight, though the moon herself remained hidden behind morning clouds. The torches had changed sometime during the night, while life was being born in the healer's chamber, while a king knelt beside a beast, While everything James thought he knew about strength and tradition, and what it meant to lead, had been rewritten in blood and tears and miracle, the fortress felt different. The very stones seemed to hum with something new. Or perhaps something very, very old, finally remembered. Behind him, from the healer's chamber, came the sound of leopard cubs mewling for their mother. And throughout Greymoor, silver-blue flames burned without smoke, without heat, without any explanation that made sense. Except one. The moon had not been silent after all. The messenger vanishes. 3 days. That was all the time James had with them. The leopard recovered with a speed that defied nature. Wounds that should have taken weeks to heal closed within days, pink flesh knitting beneath Sienna's careful bandages. By the second morning, the great cat was standing, moving with only the slightest limp. By the third, she walked as though she'd never been injured at all. "It's not possible," Sienna murmured, unwrapping the shoulder wound to find nothing but faint scars beneath. "I've never seen anything heal like this. Not wolf, not human, not anything." James ran his fingers along the healed tissue, feeling the leopard's purr vibrate through his palm. "She's not like anything we've known." The cubs thrived with equal impossibility. Born small and struggling, they'd grown robust in mere days, their eyes opening earlier than any feline James had ever read about. They tumbled over each other with increasing coordination, their mules growing stronger, more demanding. James found himself spending every free moment in the healer's chamber. He told himself it was to ensure their safety, to monitor their recovery. But the truth sat heavier in his chest. He didn't want to leave them. Didn't want to face the moment when this strange, sacred interlude would end. That moment came at dawn on the 4th day. James woke in the chair by the fire, neck stiff from another night of restless watching. Pale light filtered through the windows. The chamber felt wrong before he even opened his eyes fully. Too quiet. Too empty. The oak table stood bare. No spotted form curled protectively around nursing cubs. No golden eyes tracking his movements. The blankets lay folded with an almost deliberate care, and on top of them, impossible but undeniable, sat a single black feather. Not from any bird that lived in these mountains. James's hand trembled as he picked it up. The feather gleamed with an oil-slick iridescence, catching light in shades of midnight blue and deep purple. It felt warm against his palm, as though it had been held by something living just moments ago. She was gone. The certainty hit him like a physical blow. The leopard had taken her cubs and vanished without sound, without warning, without goodbye. The fortress guards had seen nothing. The walls bore no marks of passage. She'd simply ceased to be there, as though she'd never existed at all. Except for the feather. And the silver-blue flames still burning in every torch. And the hollow ache in James's chest that felt too much like grief. "My lord." Sienna appeared in the doorway, took one look at the empty chamber, and went pale. "When did she?" "Sometime before dawn." James's voice sounded distant to his own ears. "She left this." Sienna examined the feather with careful fingers. "I've never seen its like." "What kind of bird?" "No bird." James took it back, tucked it carefully into his pocket. "Something else." He walked to the window and stared out at the mountains, trying to convince himself this was right, natural, expected. Wild creatures didn't stay. The leopard had healed, her cubs were strong, and she'd returned to wherever she belonged. But his wolf howled loss inside his chest, and James couldn't silence it. The council convened that afternoon without his summons. James entered the chamber to find them already seated, already deep in heated discussion. Elder Margrave's voice carried above the others. "Clear sign of weakness that rival packs will exploit." The conversation died as James took his seat at the head of the table. 12 pairs of eyes fixed on him with varying degrees of judgment, concern, and barely concealed contempt. "Alpha James." Margrave inclined his head with just enough respect to avoid outright insubordination. "We were discussing the recent events." "Were you?" James kept his tone neutral. "How considerate of you to include me." Counselor Helena spoke up, her sharp features pinched with disapproval. "My lord, you must understand how this appears. You brought a wild beast into our sacred halls. You tended to it personally. You knelt before it. I showed mercy to a creature in need. You showed weakness, Counselor Marcus cut in. The scarred warrior leaned forward, thick arms crossed. And our rivals are already whispering. The Western packs mock us. They say Greymoor's alpha has gone soft, that he values animals over his own kind. Then they understand nothing about strength. Don't they? Margrave's voice held cold challenge. You dismissed your counsel. Ignored our counsel. Risked exposure to disease, to danger, for a creature that couldn't even offer thanks before it abandoned you. The words struck deeper than James wanted to admit. He thought of waking to an empty chamber, of the hollow silence where purring had been. The leopard chose to leave, as is her right. And what did we gain from harboring her? Helena demanded. What benefit to Greymoor, to our pack? We've become a laughingstock. The Northern Alliance questions whether you're fit to lead. And these flames, she gestured to the silver-blue torch burning on the wall, this unnatural light frightens our people. Some call it a curse. Others call it a blessing, James said quietly. Which is it, Alpha? Marcus's tone held an edge. Because if you cannot explain what happened, if you cannot justify the risk you took, then perhaps the Northern Alliance has reason to question your judgment. James met each council member's gaze in turn. Most looked away. A few, Margrave, Helena, Marcus, held firm, challenge written in their expressions. The leopard was under my protection, James said. I would make the same choice again. Even if it costs you your authority? Margrave asked softly. Even if other packs see mercy as weakness and use it to strip you of power, authority built on cruelty isn't worth keeping. The silence that followed held teeth. Finally, Counselor Sarah spoke, one of the younger members, usually quiet in these meetings. The flames, my lord. What do they mean? James had no answer that would satisfy them. I don't know. You don't know. Margrave repeated the words like an indictment. You've changed the very nature of our fortress with your actions, and you don't know what it means. I know that something greater than us took notice, James said. Whether that's blessing or curse, time will tell. Time we may not have. Marcus stood abruptly. The Western packs are already testing our borders. The Northern Alliance watches for any sign of weakness. You've given them ammunition, Alpha. You've made us vulnerable. Then we'll prove them wrong. Will we? Helena's smile held no warmth. Or will we watch Greymoor fall because its alpha valued a beast over his pack? James dismissed them shortly after, unable to stomach more of their barely veiled insubordination. But their words lingered, poisoning his thoughts. That evening, he stood alone in the healer's chamber, holding the black feather up to lamplight. The silver-blue flames reflected in its surface, creating patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Almost like writing in a language he couldn't read. What are you? He whispered to the empty room. What did you leave behind? No answer came. Only silence and the distant sound of the fortress settling into night. What James didn't see was the shadow that detached itself from the corridor outside. Didn't hear the soft footsteps retreating toward the western tower. In a locked chamber far from the Alpha's quarters, 6 figures gathered by candlelight. No silver-blue flames here. Only ordinary fire that cast ordinary shadows. Elder Margrave stood at their center, face grim in the flickering light. It's decided then, he said quietly. We cannot wait for James to see reason. If he won't protect Greymoor's interests, then we must. Counselor Marcus nodded slowly. The Northern Alliance has made their offer. If we move quickly. No. Helena's voice cut sharp. Not the Northern Alliance. They'd consume us whole. But the Western packs, they might be reasoned with. At what cost? The question came from Samuel, one of the younger conspirators, doubt written on his face. Whatever is necessary. Margrave's eyes were cold in the candlelight. James has forgotten what it means to be alpha. He's become weak, sentimental. That leopard was the final proof. He saved her life, Samuel protested weakly. He endangered ours. Margrave leaned forward. The flames may frighten our people, but they terrify me more. What if this is the moon's judgment? What if she's marked us for our alpha's transgression? The others shifted uneasily. We send word to the Western packs tomorrow, Margrave continued. Quietly. We feel them out, see what terms they'd offer. And if James continues down this path of mercy and weakness, he let the sentence hang unfinished. Outside, the silver-blue flames burned steadily. And in the mountains beyond Greymoor's walls, a leopard paused in her journey and turned to look back at the fortress. Her golden eyes reflected those impossible flames. Then she vanished into the darkness, her cubs following close behind. Betrayal under the full moon. The full moon rose over Greymoor like a judgment. James stood on the western rampart, watching silver light spill across the mountains. For the first time in a week, the sky had cleared completely. No clouds veiled the moon's face. She looked down on the fortress with cold, distant brilliance. The silver-blue flames had vanished at sunset. Every torch in Greymoor now burned ordinary gold, as though the past week had been a fever dream. As though nothing sacred had happened within these walls. James's hand found the black feather in his pocket. Still warm. Still real. Alpha James. He turned to find Elder Margrave approaching with a contingent of warriors, Marcus, Helena, and 6 others whose faces James recognized, but whose loyalty he'd apparently misjudged. "The council requests your presence," Margrave said. Immediately. Something in their formation made James's wolf bristle. Too rigid. Too formal. Warriors positioned not as escort but as containment. "It's nearly midnight," James said carefully. "Whatever business." "Cannot wait." Margrave's voice held iron. "By order of the council, you are summoned to answer for your crimes against Greymoor." The word crimes landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward into implications James couldn't quite grasp. "What crimes?" "Come peacefully, my lord, and we'll discuss it properly." Marcus's hand rested on his sword hilt. "Or make this difficult." James could have fought. Should have, perhaps. But curiosity and something deeper, a bone-deep exhaustion with leadership that felt increasingly hollow, made him nod. "Lead on." They didn't take him to the council chamber. Instead, the warriors guided him through corridors growing progressively darker, descending into sections of the fortress James rarely visited. The dungeons were far behind them. They were heading for the old garrison, the abandoned wing that overlooked Shadow Ravine. James stopped walking. "Far enough. Keep moving." Marcus drew his sword. "You mean to kill me?" James said it flatly, without surprise. He'd been naive, he realized. Fatally, stupidly naive. "We mean to save Greymoor." Margrave stepped forward, moonlight through a high window painting his face in harsh angles. "You've lost the moon's favor, James." The flames proved it. They burned false for 3 days, then vanished. "She marked your transgression and withdrew her blessing." "That's not." "You brought corruption into our sacred halls." Helena's voice shook with conviction. "You knelt before a beast. You valued an animal's life over your pack's honor. The Western packs circle like vultures because they sense our weakness." "Your weakness. So you'll murder your alpha." James kept his voice steady even as his mind raced through options, calculating odds. 9 against 1. His wolf could take 3, maybe 4. But not all of them. That will surely restore their respect. "You'll die a hero," Margrave said softly. "Defending the fortress against an attack. Your sacrifice will be honored. And Greymoor will have an alpha who understands that strength, not mercy, keeps a pack alive." James laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Let me guess. You've already chosen my successor." "Marcus has agreed to serve." Margrave gestured, and the warriors began to spread out, encircling. "He understands what you never did. That sometimes the pack requires hard choices. That softness is fatal." "I see." James rolled his shoulders, feeling his wolf surge beneath his skin. "And this is a hard choice?" "The hardest." Margrave actually sounded regretful. "I taught you, James. I watched you grow. But that leopard broke something in you. Made you forget what you are." "She reminded me," James said quietly, "of what I'd forgotten." "Then die with your delusions." They attacked as one. James shifted mid-motion, bones cracking and reforming, wolf erupting from human skin. His jaw closed on the nearest warrior's arm, teeth finding flesh. Another blade sliced across his ribs, silver-coated, burning like acid. He spun, claws raking. Someone screamed. Blood sprayed across stone. But there were too many. Too many blades, too many bodies, too much silver burning through his system. James fought with desperate fury, taking one down, then another. But Marcus was skilled, and Helena fought like she had nothing to lose. A sword caught his hind leg, shearing through tendon and bone. James collapsed, shifted back to human in his agony. His ankle bent at an impossible angle, shattered beyond healing. Enough. Margrave's voice cut through the chaos. To the window. Strong hands hauled James upright. Every breath sent knives through his ribs, broken, punctured, grinding against each other. His vision swam. They dragged him to the tall window overlooking Shadow Ravine. James had looked down into that darkness before, knew what lay below. 100-foot drop onto rocks sharp enough to tear flesh from bone. Nothing that fell into the ravine ever climbed back out. Any last words? Margrave asked. James spat blood. You're making a mistake. We're making a choice. Margrave nodded to the others. For Graymore. They threw him. For one suspended moment, James hung in moonlight and empty air. The fortress walls blurred past. Wind screamed in his ears. Below, darkness waited with stone teeth. Then impact brutal, absolute, agonizing. Ribs that were cracked shattered completely. His already ruined ankle twisted further. Something in his back snapped. James's scream died in his throat, choked off by blood and pain too vast for sound. He landed among the rocks at the ravine's bottom, body broken, bleeding, each breath a new exercise in torture. Above, impossibly far away, he could see the window where his killers stood. Moonlight silhouetted their forms as they watched to ensure his death. Then they turned away. Silence rushed in to fill the space where sounds of life should be, no heartbeat but his own, fading. No breath but his failing lungs. No movement but the slow spread of blood across stone. James stared up at the moon, full and cold and distant in the slice of sky visible between ravine walls. She offered no comfort. No sign. No indication that she'd noticed her alpha dying in darkness. The silver-blue flames had been a lie then. Or a test he'd failed. He thought of the leopard's golden eyes. The trust in them as she'd lowered her head. The cubs, impossibly perfect, mewling for their mother. Had it been worth it? Trading his life, his pack, his future for 3 days of caring for creatures that had vanished without trace? James didn't know anymore. Maybe Margrave had been right. Maybe mercy was a luxury alphas couldn't afford. Maybe he'd been weak, foolish, unfit to lead. His vision darkened at the edges. Cold seeped into his bones, not winter's cold, but something deeper, more permanent. The cold of endings. James closed his eyes. He'd shown kindness once. Let that be enough. Let that be what he was remembered for, even if only the stones and silence knew. His breathing slowed. One breath. Another. A final one. Movement above. James's eyes cracked open, though it took every ounce of remaining strength. At first, he thought it was his killers returning to confirm his death. But the shape descending the ravine wall moved wrong. Too fluid. Too fast. Claws finding purchase in stone no wolf could grip. Moonlight caught on spotted fur. No, James thought distantly. Impossible. Hallucination. Death's mercy before the end. But the leopard kept coming, climbing down sheer cliff face with impossible grace, golden eyes fixed on his broken form with an intensity that felt almost human. Behind her, smaller shapes followed. Cubs that should have been helpless, barely days old, navigating stone walls like they'd been born to it. The leopard reached the ravine floor and approached slowly. James tried to speak, to ask why, to understand, but only blood bubbled from his lips. She pressed her massive head against his chest, just above his shattered ribs. Her purr vibrated through his failing body. And the moon, cold and distant and silent above, finally offered her answer. Light descended, not silver blue this time, but pure white, brilliant as noon sun at midnight. It poured down into the ravine like liquid starlight, like concentrated divinity, like something so far beyond mortal understanding that James's mind couldn't contain it. The leopard's form began to shimmer. And James, broken and bleeding and balanced on death's edge, realized with sudden terrible clarity that he'd never been caring for a leopard at all. He'd been caring for something infinitely more. A debt repaid. The light was killing him. James felt it burning through his broken body, not with heat, but with something more fundamental, like sunlight through closed eyelids magnified 1,000-fold. Every cell screamed against the intrusion even as something deeper recognized it, yearned for it, knew it as holy. Through the white brilliance, he watched the leopard's form blur and shimmer like heat mirages on desert stone. But she didn't transform, didn't shift into some other shape. Instead, the light poured into her, through her, until her spotted coat gleamed with an inner radiance that hurt to witness. Her golden eyes blazed like molten metal. The cubs pressed close to their mother, and they too began to glow. Except, they weren't cubs anymore. In the space between one breath and the next, the tiny mewling infants had grown. Not gradually, but instantly, impossibly. They stood as large as adult leopards now, muscles rippling beneath coats that shimmered with the same divine light as their mother. James tried to speak, to understand, but his punctured lungs wouldn't cooperate. Blood filled his mouth. The leopard leaned closer, so close her breath stirred his hair. Her purr deepened into something that resonated in his bones, in his wolf, in the very marrow of his being. Not a sound but a message, delivered in a language older than words. You saved me when you had nothing to gain. You showed mercy when your kind demanded strength. You knelt when they commanded you to stand tall. James's eyes widened. He wasn't hearing her voice, the leopard's mouth never moved. But understanding flooded him nonetheless, instinct translating what words never could. Now I repay what is owed. The leopard threw back her head and howled. The sound tore through the ravine, through the fortress walls, through the very fabric of the night. It wasn't a roar. Wasn't anything in the natural lexicon of animal calls. It was a summons, pure and absolute, carrying the weight of divine command. Above, James heard shouts of alarm. Boots on stone. Confusion spreading through Greymoor like wildfire. And then answering howls. Wolves. Dozens of them. The younger generation that James had trained, the warriors who'd sworn loyalty before the council's poison had spread, the ones who'd believed in mercy as strength rather than weakness. The leopard's grown cubs moved with liquid grace, scaling the ravine walls in heartbeats. They disappeared over the rim, and James heard gasps of shock, the clash of steel, bodies hitting stone. What sorcery? Protect the Alpha. Margrave, what have you done? More howls joined the chorus. James's pack, or what remained of it, had heard the summons and answered. Through the narrow slice of visible sky, he saw wolves flooding onto the ramparts, saw his people turning against the conspirators who'd tried to kill him. The leopard remained beside James, radiating heat and light and something that felt like concentrated purpose. Her eyes never left his face as chaos erupted above. Then new figures appeared at the ravine's edge. Younger wolves, loyal ones, staring down in horror at their broken alpha. My lord. Sienna's voice cracked with anguish. How do we? The walls are sheer. One of the leopard cubs appeared beside the healer, fluid as water, and turned its massive head toward the ravine floor. Toward its mother. The meaning was clear. Hold on, Alpha. A young warrior named Thomas began the descent, finding handholds where none should exist, moving with reckless speed. Others followed, a half-dozen wolves loyal enough to risk the climb, desperate enough to try. The leopard watched them come. Still she purred, still that bone-deep vibration flowed through James's failing body. He could feel his heartbeat stuttering, feel consciousness slipping away despite the divine light surrounding him. Not yet, the instinct voice said. You don't die here. You don't die by their treachery. Why? James managed to whisper, blood bubbling on his lips. Why save me? The leopard pressed her forehead to his, and suddenly James saw. A vision or a memory, or a truth that existed outside linear time. He saw the moon goddess looking down on her children, on the wolves who'd once understood sacred bonds between all living things. saw how they'd grown cold over generations, trading wildness for walls, mercy for dominance, connection for control. Saw the goddess sending a messenger to test them, to find if any of her wolves still remembered the old ways. Saw that messenger choosing the storm, choosing the wounds, choosing James because something in him still carried the ember of what had been lost. Saw the birth not as accident but as sacred covenant, life given in the place of death, trust offered where fear reigned, divinity manifesting in the space between heartbeats. You passed the test, the voice said. You alone remembered what it means to be wolf. The vision shattered as Thomas reached the bottom, half sliding the last 10 feet. He took one look at James's injuries and went white. Oh gods. Oh gods, his ankle, his ribs. We need to move him. Sienna had made the descent behind him, healer's bag somehow still intact. But any movement might kill him. The leopard stood, and the other wolves scrambled back instinctively. She positioned herself beside James's broken body, then lowered herself until her spotted belly touched stone. The meaning was unmistakable. You want us to? Sienna looked between the leopard and James, understanding and disbelief warring on her face. You'll carry him? The leopard's golden eyes blazed confirmation. Together, with agonizing care, they lifted James onto the leopard's back. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through his shattered frame. He felt ribs grinding, felt his ruined ankles shifting, felt something deep in his spine protesting. But the leopard's warmth flowed into him, and the divine light pulsed brighter. Not healing, not yet, but sustaining. Keeping him alive through sheer supernatural will. The leopard began to climb. It should have been impossible. Should have been suicide for both of them. But she moved with preternatural grace, claws finding purchase in solid stone, powerful legs propelling them upward. James clung to her neck, consciousness fading in and out, each breath a prayer he didn't know how to finish. Above, he heard fighting. Heard Margrave shouting orders, heard Marcus rallying those warriors still loyal to the conspiracy. But more voices rose against them, younger wolves who'd seen their alpha thrown into darkness, who'd heard a summons they couldn't ignore. The leopard crested the ravine's edge. Greymoor's courtyard had become a battlefield. Wolves fought wolves, betrayer against loyalist, Margrave's faction against those who'd answered the divine call. The leopard's 2 cubs moved through the chaos like avenging spirits, not killing but incapacitating, separating combatants with surgical precision. Stand down. Sienna's voice rang out as she pulled herself over the edge behind them. You're alpha lives. Stand down, all of you. The fighting slowed, then stopped. Wolves on both sides turned to stare at the impossible sight. Their alpha, broken and bleeding, carried on the back of a creature that should have fled days ago, that shouldn't exist in their world of stone and tradition. Margrave stood near the fortress entrance, sword still raised, face twisted with fury and disbelief. Sorcery, he spat. Dark magic. This proves James has turned from the moon. The sky exploded with light. Not moonlight. Not earthly illumination. Pure silver radiance flooded down from the heavens, so bright that every wolf threw their arms across their eyes. It painted the fortress walls, the courtyard stones, every face upturned in wonder or terror. And in that light, James felt her presence descend. The moon goddess didn't speak with words. She didn't need to. Her divine attention pressed down on Greymoor like a physical weight, and every wolf felt it in their bones, their blood, their souls. She spoke in instinct and knowing, in understanding that bypassed language entirely. I sent my messenger. You threw her into the storm. I sent my test. You called it weakness. I sent my blessing. You called it curse. But one among you remembered. One among you showed mercy when mercy meant sacrifice. One among you knelt when kneeling required more strength than standing. The light focused, narrowing, concentrating until it formed a pillar of radiance, connecting heaven to the spot where the leopard stood with James on her back. This is my chosen alpha. This is the wolf who proved worthy. And those who raise their hand against him have raised their hand against me. Margrave dropped his sword. It clattered against stone, impossibly loud in the profound silence. The moon goddess's presence swelled, filling every corner of the fortress, and James felt her attention turn to him specifically. Felt her looking into his soul, examining what she found there. Then approval. Warm and absolute and terrifying in its intensity. You will lead them back to wildness. You will teach them what they forgot. You will. The divine voice cut off. Not gradually, but instantly, like a door slamming shut. The light vanished. The presence withdrew. The world returned to ordinary moonlight and mortal concerns. James opened his mouth to ask why, to understand, and collapsed. He slid from the leopard's back, his broken body finally surrendering to injuries that should have killed him in the ravine. His vision went dark around the edges. Sound faded to a distant roar. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the leopard's face, golden eyes wide with something that looked almost like alarm. The last thing he heard was a voice, not instinct this time, but actual words, spoken in a tone of ancient authority that made his wolf bow in recognition. James of Greymore. Your body breaks, but your soul endures. Sleep now and when you wake. The goddess's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire fortress. Everything will change. Darkness took him then, complete and absolute. And in that darkness, James dreamed of leopards and moonlight and a future he couldn't yet imagine. The blessed Alpha King. James woke to silver light and the scent of mountain herbs. Not the sharp antiseptic of the healer's chamber, but something older, wild sage, moonflower, plants that grew only in the highest peaks where wolves rarely ventured. His eyes opened slowly, heavy with the weight of deep sleep, and found himself staring at an unfamiliar ceiling. Stone, yes, but carved with patterns he didn't recognize. Spirals and crescents, leopard prints interwoven with wolf tracks, symbols that predated Greymoor's founding by centuries. Easy. Sienna's hand pressed gently on his shoulder. You've been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days. James tried to sit up, gasped as his ribs protested. But the pain was manageable, sharp rather than agonizing. His exploring fingers found bandages wrapped tight around his chest, felt the strange warmth radiating from beneath. Your ankle was shattered beyond anything I could mend, Sienna continued softly. Your ribs punctured a lung. Your spine had fractures in 3 places. She paused, and James heard wonder creep into her clinical tone. You should be dead, James. Or paralyzed at minimum. But I'm not. No. Sienna moved to the window, pulled back thick curtains. Moonlight flooded in. Not ordinary silver, but touched with that same blue radiance that had burned in Greymoor's torches. You're not. James followed her gaze outside and went still. The fortress had changed. Vines he didn't recognize climbed the ancient walls, covered in night-blooming flowers that glowed faintly in the darkness. The courtyard stones bore new carvings, the same symbols from this ceiling, appearing as though they'd always been there, simply waiting to be revealed. And throughout it all, silver-blue flames burned in torches and braziers, painting everything in shades of twilight and divinity. What happened? James whispered. The moon goddess finished what she started. Sienna turned back to him. When you collapsed, she didn't leave. For 3 days, her light stayed focused on this fortress. The leopard and her cubs remained, guarding you while you healed. And Greymoor, transformed. James swung his legs carefully off the bed. His ankle protested but held. Sienna moved to help him stand, but he waved her off, needing to prove to himself that he could. One step. Another. His body ached but obeyed. The traitors, he asked. Sienna's expression hardened. Margrave, Helena, and Marcus are in the dungeons, along with the 6 warriors who helped throw you into the ravine. The rest of the pack demands justice. And what do they consider justice? Execution. Sienna met his gaze evenly. They tried to murder their alpha. Under ancient law, the punishment is death. James limped to the window, looking out at his transformed fortress. Somewhere out there, 9 wolves waited to learn their fate. 9 of his people who'd believed so strongly that mercy was weakness they'd been willing to kill for it. Bring me to them, he said finally. The dungeons lay deep beneath Greymoor, carved into bedrock that had never seen sunlight. But even here, The transformation had reached. Silver-blue flames burned in the sconces, and the oppressive darkness James remembered had lifted, replaced by something that felt almost peaceful. The conspirators occupied separate cells. Margrave looked up as James approached, and something flickered across his weathered face. Shame, perhaps, or the ghost of defiance not yet fully extinguished. "Come to watch us hang, Alpha?" His voice held more weariness than challenge. "I came to ask a question." James stopped outside the cell, aware of the dozen warriors flanking him, of Sienna a step behind. "Did you truly believe I'd lost the moon's favor? Or did you simply fear what it meant if I hadn't?" Silence answered him. But in that silence, James read truth. They'd been afraid. Not of divine judgment, but of change. Of a world where strength could wear a gentler face, where tradition bent to mercy, where an alpha might kneel and still retain his power. "The law demands your deaths," James said quietly. "My pack cries for your blood. After what you did, they'd be within their rights." Margrave's head lifted. But I am not the alpha you tried to kill." James's words rang against stone. "I'm the one the moon chose to survive. And she didn't save me so I could begin my reign with executions." He heard murmurs behind him, warriors uncertain, seeking guidance in unprecedented territory. "You are exiled," James announced. "All 9 of you. You'll be escorted to the border at dawn. You may take what you can carry, but you leave Greymoor forever. If you return, then and only then will you face execution." Marcus gripped the cell bars. "Exile is a death sentence. Lone wolves don't survive." "Then perhaps you should have considered that before throwing your alpha into a ravine." James's tone remained level. "You'll survive or you won't. But you'll do it far from those you tried to lead astray." He turned away from their protests, from their pleas, and climbed back toward the light. Sienna caught up to him in the upper halls. "The pack won't understand. They want blood for blood. Then I'll teach them to want something better." James stopped, met her eyes. "The moon didn't save me to perpetuate cycles of violence. She saved me to break them." The formal ceremony happened at moonrise 3 days later. Every wolf in Greymoor gathered in the great hall. Transformed now, its stern stone walls softened by those impossible vines and glowing flowers. The silver-blue flames cast everything in shades of legend. James stood before his people, ankles still tender but supporting his weight. He wore formal alpha attire for the first time since his near-death silver and gray, marked with symbols both old and new. "We are changing," he said, voice carrying to the rafters. "Not abandoning what we were, but remembering what we'd forgotten. Our ancestors understood something we lost, that strength flows from connection, not isolation. That mercy isn't weakness, and wildness isn't something to be conquered." He gestured to the transformed fortress around them. "The moon has spoken. She sent her messenger, and we nearly destroyed her for it. But one test doesn't determine our future. We determine it. By choosing every day what kind of pack we want to be." From the crowd, Thomas spoke up. "What would you have us choose, Alpha?" James smiled. "To honor life in all its forms. To recognize the sacred in the wild. To understand that we're part of something larger than Greymoor's walls." He drew a ceremonial knife, held it up to catch the blue-silver light. Then he made a cut across his palm, let blood drip onto the stone floor. "By my blood and the moon's blessing, I declare leopards sacred to this pack. Any who harm them harm Greymoor itself. Let this be our first law under the new covenant." The blood pooled on stone, then began to glow. Softly at first, then brighter, until it formed shapes, leopard prints that spread across the floor like footsteps walking through the hall. The pack gasped. Some dropped to their knees. Others simply stared in wonder. "She's still here," Sienna whispered beside him. "The goddess. She's still watching." James felt it too, that vast attention, warm with approval. Not speaking, not manifesting, but present nonetheless. A constant reminder that they were seen, known, held accountable. And somewhere in that divine presence,